Welcome to Position in Neutrality. Welcome to New Freedom. Is there anyone in this group here for the very first time tonight? Anybody? Oh, good. A few of you. Very good. So first of all, welcome. And second, let us warn you in advance, you're liable to perceive us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. Primary reason that's liable to happen is that we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here, we've been doing for lots of years, we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? The process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. So what I'll try and do is show you how I find my experience in the book, encourage you to have your experience, and if we both do our job, we'll share a spiritual experience in this room tonight. How many of you have been here before and can witness for folks that's what happens? So when those of you online, they're raising their hands, so you know in 12-step recovery, when we talk of a spiritual experience, we're talking about a sensory experience. You'll feel it. When you do, I'll know and I'll call it to your attention, because we would teach you to talk to you about the power we call God without a demonstration of the power. Fair enough? And then the other thing for you all that are members here, if you're new to this group, if you want to invite your families to both the Position in Neutrality meeting on Thursday and the church service, the Recovery Church, on Saturday, both at 6:15, the door is open. You and your family can fellowship together, come to the service. We want you to share at least your recovery and that type of experience with them while you're here as members in our program here, okay? And Chaplain Lee officiates the Recovery Church. And those of you that did any time in Arizona, especially if you went through the Florence complex, you might have run into him. He was there about 30 years. So, all right. So tonight we're going to take a look at the first step. And so what I have to warn you in advance about the first step is we're going to experience some highs and some lows. Yes? Because if it was all not fun, we wouldn't have stayed at it so long, right? Some highs. And we eventually got beaten into submission. So powerless and unmanageability is an experience rather than a concept, yes? Okay, so I'm going to start with just showing you the title of the book so that we're all on the same page. If you go to the title page of your book, we call it the big book in AA because it was a big book. That's how drunks are. They're very literal. Wow, that's a big fucking book. Let's call it the big book. But the reality is it's titled Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. The very first printing said how many hundreds. But as they reprinted, they added to the total because hundreds and then thousands of men and women recovered, and they told their story, this bunch, right? And it's in here, their story, not our story, their story. And I tell you that so you understand that this is testimony. So the reason we don't alter it is not because we're legalists, it's because we don't have a right to alter their testimony because the experience they share with us worked for them, but if we alter it, it may not work for the next guy we share it with. Does it make sense? So our job is to find ourselves in their pages. And so I want to go now forward to the first edition, and they tell us who the we is on all the steps you've ever read. Have you ever been in the halls where they have the steps on the wall? And it said, we admitted, and we, right? And sometimes there's people in our modern fellowships that say, we're we. We're a we program. We may well be a we program, but we are not we. Which is why we don't want to change the testimony of we, who they're going to tell us who they are. Does that make sense? So it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of the book. Now, if you have precise instructions on how someone else recovered, and someone says, I think I'm going to add something to it, And all of a sudden it starts to have the ring of authority because everyone's adding their own little thing, and pretty soon the efficacy rate goes from 65% documented over 15 years, from 1939 till 1955, 65% efficacy rate. Those of you in behavioral health know that we're somewhere less than 10 today. In spite of all the advances in medical science, and so somebody watered down the testimony. Does it make sense? So we're going to look into this book, try and find our experience in it, because they tell us precisely how they recovered. They used an interesting word there, to show other alcoholics precisely. They didn't say to tell them. So what do you think they meant? They describe an experience, and they recorded the experience, but the only way I can show you the experience they recorded is to have had a similar one. And then I sit down and I show you what I've been shown as I align myself with what they said, which is what we attempt to do here. Does it make sense? Okay. So then I'm going to go to the forward to the second edition just briefly so that you know about the difference between program and fellowship for your benefit. Not to correct people, but so you understand, because there's confusion around program and fellowship. You ever heard anyone say, I'm in the program? All the time. It's a common thing. You're not in the program unless you're in the pages of the book, because the program's described in the book. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Not here are the meetings we attended, which are suggested, right? Very intentional. So, not trying to be legalist, but if you've struggled or you've remained sober but miserable, they're going to witness to you a liberation from yourself so you're finally free to be yourself. Right? Okay. So it says on the bottom of XVII, in the forward to second edition, it was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. So they went from 35 to 39, published the book. They start to make sense now. And then it says the membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, so up to that time they had no name. And so they were arguing about, as we addicts, alcoholics will do, they argued about what shall we call ourselves. And it says they decided, now began to call themselves Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. So why do I tell you that? Well, because Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship, was named after the book that describes the precise program. So in a very real way, if you're not in this book, you're not in the program. You're in the fellowship. And the only reason we want to make that clear is so we don't deceive or leave people miserable. Does that make sense? Okay, so then I'm going to jump over to the doctor's opinion, because we've done enough history for the night. And in the doctor's opinion, I think I want to I'm going to jump past where the authors speak to us, and I'm going to go into the expanded text of Dr. William Silkworth, he gave an opinion about the recovery program that the authors are about to describe. Does that make sense? So, how many of you went to a physician or two along the way to get an opinion about your condition? How many of you weren't really happy with their opinion about your condition? How many of you, when you really felt like you were screwed up badly enough that you really wanted a solution, found somebody who recovered who was not a physician who somehow could reach you, which is why a peer model works, right? Okay. So I'm going to jump to the bottom of the XVII, and I'm going to start right at the last sentence. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. So what did they tell us about the alcoholic's craving?
Freedom based on a physical reaction of the body.
Yeah. That craving that abnormal reaction, my utter inability to leave it alone once I start, isn't willful, it's physical. So what I'm trying to will away with my mind, I'm finding impossible. Any of you set limits for yourself and then overshoot the mark? Okay, so the doctor describes that to us as a physical craving, and he goes on to say in other texts that may be the manifestation of an allergy. How many of you have heard the reaction described as an allergy, and it didn't really make sense? We heard jokes about it, right? I drink and I break out in handcuffs, right? We've heard all of that silliness. Okay, so what they're really trying to say is a medical man using medical terminology, when he sees the abnormal reaction before him, he describes it as an allergic reaction, or it may be the manifestation of an allergy. Where's my drinkers? Any drinkers in here? How many of you, when you drank alcohol, found it energized you? Okay, it's a sedative. So that's an abnormal reaction to a sedative. Does it make sense? Where's my opiate addicts? How many of you had a similar abnormal reaction? Right? When you got hooked up, all of a sudden you were engaged. And when you were out, not good, right? Meth addicts? Where's my true meth addicts? You guys would slam that shit and not out. True? That is a very abnormal reaction to a powerful stimulant. Okay, so are we on track? It's not a joke, because if we don't know that, that sets us apart as a distinct entity. The way I used wasn't a choice. The way I used was a manifestation of a physical condition. I was predisposed to do it. Does that make sense? Okay. So it goes on to say that this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. What's that sound like? They may send us to detox. Okay? All right? And then it says before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit, because they got to get me past the physical craving so they can work on changing my mind, right? Because they're going to need my participation. Yes? Okay? So we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. The phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So how many in a never?
0.
Only one answer? How many in a never? Not even one. So ask yourself, have I ever put substance in my body and found that I took more than I had originally intended? That never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Now, that doesn't tell me I'm an addict, but it tells me I'm not average temperate. Got that part? Okay, we're gonna dig a little deeper then. We don't know what we are, but we do know what we are not. We are not average or temperate. Anyone average but temperate? No? Okay. All right. So, it says that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit, have you found that you've formed a habit? Then it says, and found that they cannot break it. Have you found that you cannot break it? Or have you not convinced yourself that you can't break it and you're still waiting for the day when you'll break it? We're not here to convince anybody. How many of you have made several efforts to just not pick up no matter what? Exert your power of will. How many of you have reconsidered? So then it says, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Has that happened for you? Yes. Then they start talking about, I find myself with problems stacking up and they're astonishingly difficult to solve, and now people are noticing, and so they're starting to plead with me. If you loved me, you'd stop. If you knew it was good for you, you'd stop. You know you're dying doing that stuff, you should stop. Am I talking to anyone here? So it says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. It's not about telling you what a bad whatever I was. It's about somebody who knows where I am emotionally and mentally, has been there, knows the way in and the way out. They've gotten a hold of power that I lack, right? Okay. So it goes on to tell us in nearly all cases their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives, right? And they're not going to tell us any more than that. They're just telling us that's their experience. Start to make sense? That's the doctor's opinion about what he's seen. So I want to jump from there over to, I'm going to skip Bill's story for a minute, and I'm going to go over to there is a solution, which we will start in, where am I at? Page 18, 19? Yeah, 17. So in chapter 2, page 17, they start to talk about the we again. And they say, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. And so we're going to go take a look at Bill's story briefly. But if you've ever read this book, Bill sounded like he was a pretty serious drinker, right? Okay. And then it says, nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. How many of you would like a solution to your drink problem or your drug problem? How many of you have discovered that there's an underlying problem that has to be solved in order for the drink problem to go away? Okay. All right. So I'm going to jump from there over to page 18. And when we start talking about coming to believe in a power greater than yourself, one of the things we're going to have to do is we're going to have to admit defeat before we start looking for a redemption. So a lot of times we skip this portion because we keep getting told, you know, you got this shit. Fight on. And of course, I'm fighting with illusions because it takes no power to not pick up. Right? It takes no power to not do. That's my dilemma. Okay. So it says an illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it an illness. So the first thing we're going to have to do, why do we explain the allergy? Because if we want to get well, we first have to believe we're sick. And once I believe I'm sick, I'm willing to listen to somebody who's found a way. And once I've been introduced to the way, I realize there's nothing wrong with me. Pick up my mat and walk. Yes? Sorry, I quoted another book, but they're related. Okay. So I'm going to jump from there down to the middle of that page. It says, highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. How many of you have found it difficult to explain to people about your addiction and what drove you? How many of you were a little baffled yourself about your addiction and what drove you? So how the fuck am I going to explain it to you when I don't get it myself? Right? If they demand an answer, I'll make one up. But I don't know. I went out for cigarettes. Ended up in Mexico. Shit, I don't know. Yes? Okay. So it says, strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us more unapproachable than do the psychiatrist or the doctor. Did you lie to the doctors? Did you lie to spouses, significant others, parents? Because I had to protect the source of my spirits. Yes? Okay. So then it goes on to say, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. The New Freedom story says an ex-offender, properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the confidence of another ex-offender in a few hours. And until this is accomplished, little or nothing can be done. It's a peer model. So all of you are living in it regardless of whatever happened, yes? Because they proved it way back then. So why do we teach it here? Because regardless, if you never had an addiction problem, but you had a behavioral disorder, lack of power is your dilemma. Yeah? You knew who you wanted to be. You even knew who you were at times, but you could not bring to consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation even a week or a month ago, and you were without defense, and you went back into the behavior disorder. Yes? Okay, so that's why this is practical in all these situations. So then I want to go to, I want to go to page 20, and I want to go to the bottom of that page. And we've already discovered we're not temperate, right? We've agreed, but let's do an evidence check. So it says moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reason for it. They can take it or leave it alone. So how many of you have found that you had difficulty just giving up, stopping and staying stopped with substances? That's true. It may be progressive. To Sean's point, how many of you had some control of it at one time? That's true too. I'm one too. I was hospitalized for alcohol poisoning for the first time at the age of 10. I never had a normal drink. But that's not everyone's story, to Sean's point. So that's why I can't tell your story. I can only tell my story, and we'll try and connect. Yeah. So if we've agreed that at least the reasons we get here is because we're probably not moderate anymore. Yeah. Okay. Then it says we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally, and it may cause him to die a few years before his time. A sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he might find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So that's the guy that'll baffle us, because I know I'm not moderate. In fact, I bragged about not being moderate. Right? But this hard drinker looks a lot like me, but he has a very different reaction than me to consequence. He can stop or moderate because of a health reason, falling in love, a change of environment. Right? How many of you have met them in your family? How many of you discovered you're not like them? How many of you went to a detox or two on the way here? How many of you met them in the detox? They're telling a very different story than we are. How many of you have met them in our fellowships? They're telling a very different story than mine, too. And their story sounds better than mine. They don't do steps. They collect chips. They don't do nothing else. They don't even read the book. No? Have you met them? We listen to them, don't we? But I better find out if I'm this other guy. And the one clue to it is if I have that abnormal reaction, I better quit listening to the nonsense and look at the experts. Because remember, a characteristic of addictive disorder is delusion. Which means I lie to me and I don't know I'm lying. You ever lie to you and didn't know you were lying? Okay. Look who I'm talking to. Right. Okay, so now they're going to talk to us about me, perhaps you. But what about the real alcoholic? They put a question mark there so we would go inward. Eyesight without insight, spiritual blindness. Anytime they put a question mark in this book, go in and ask yourself that question. What about the real alcoholic? Because we are baffling creatures, us real alcoholics. Okay? He may start off as a moderate drinker, Sean's point. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. So who's in the room? Someone in the room tonight was a periodic. You didn't do it all the time, but when you went off the rails. And did they get a little closer together, or the consequences when you're off get more serious? So we may want to read a little further. Okay? But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. So lose the fact of how often or how long or what you thought control you had in the past. And am I progressively losing control once I start? The one symptom I have in common, if I'm this guy, is this manifestation of an allergy. Does it make sense? And now we know the allergy isn't me breaking out in handcuffs. That's a consequence of acting the way I act when I'm high. But the abnormal reaction to the chemical is my inability to leave it alone. A sedative energizes me. Yes? Okay. All right, so then they're going to talk directly to me, perhaps you. Here's the fellow who's been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. How many of you were puzzled by your lack of control? How many of you set limits for yourself? How many of you broke those limits? How many of you set new limits right after you broke them? How many of you toasted them too? So then it's going to say he does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. How many of you can think of some of those? Absurd, incredible, tragic, yes? He's a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Any of you experience a personality change when you use? Different animal come out. Okay? It says he's seldom mildly intoxicated. He's always more or less insanely drunk. How many of you relate to that? And how many of you go, that's not me? Because there's people in the room who, though you are insanely drunk, don't think yourself insanely drunk. How many of you went to the detox and they took your blood alcohol and they said, dude, you should be hospitalized? Any of you had that happen? And you said, well, hence my arrival. Could someone help me park my car? I'm right out here in the lane. You get what I'm putting down? I never thought myself insanely drunk. I passed out before I thought myself insanely drunk. And if you work with enough of us, you'll find that true, that you be pretty damn inebriated and still be able to pull it off. Anyway, so it says his disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature, but little. How many of you know your normal nature? That's always the baffling one for. We really don't know our normal nature, do we? I had to inquire of psychiatric people, what the hell do they mean by normal nature? And what was explained to me is normal human nature is childlike rather than childish. And I have to admit that I sometimes catch myself not being innocent and inquisitive, but being a jackoff. Childish, not childlike. Make sense? But I have the ability when I'm well to be more inquisitive and genuine, and yes, that's my normal nature. Does it make sense? Okay? So he may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. How many of you relate to that? Dangerously antisocial, right? All kinds of things that could mean, yeah? He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. Any of you get some good news in the middle of your addiction, go out to celebrate the good news, then miss the appointment. Okay? He's often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect, he's incredibly dishonest and selfish. Did you take it out far enough that you would lie, cheat, steal? Not everybody does. I'm just asking. I was the same way, Kenny. I didn't think myself that guy, but I found myself being that guy. Okay? He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes and has a promising career ahead of him. How many of it? That's probably everyone in this room, right? You have skills and abilities. You've built yourself up, right? And then it says he uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. Any of you ever had sprees? Did you have to reset the mark when that happened? Move to a new town, or new job, new house, something? Long run. That's a new house. He's the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around, yet early the next morning searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. Where's my drinkers? There you go. There you go. You had to find the pipe. You didn't hide the pipe. You just lost it. What are you talking about? What was in the pipe, Raheem? Probably ceiling crumbles. Right? He had finished it the night before, but just in case. Okay, got it. So, it says this is by no means a comprehensive picture of the true alcoholic because our behavior patterns vary. But if you're relating to it, then we need to take a deeper dive because I may be the real alcoholic instead of the hard drinker. How many of you are thinking, I have that abnormal reaction sometimes, but not every time? Who's in the room that has that going on in their head? Any of you following me close enough to see if you're diagnosing yourself? Someone in the room is going, that doesn't happen to me every time. Who are you? That doesn't happen to me every time. So, because that's the mind talking to me. So my next question to you is, do you know which time it's going to happen? No. So did you ever really have control? No. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Does it make sense? Okay. All right. So I'm going to go from there to the middle of that page and it says, why does he behave like this if hundreds of examples have shown him that one drink means another debacle with all its attendant suffering and humiliation? Why is it he takes that one drink? Isn't that the question? Because what we forget is we tell people, if you don't pick up, it won't happen. We'll even tell them, before you pick up, call me. You ever heard that bullshit? Look, I wasn't planning on sharing, so I sure as hell wasn't calling you. Right? It's not even about, I've heard people say, well, I didn't want you to talk me out of it. Dude, there ain't nobody, if you're serious, ain't no one talking you out of it. By the time I call you, I'm just looking for a ride to the next one. All right, so why he can't stay on the water wagon? What has become of the common sense and willpower he can still sometimes display with respect to other matters? So you're still doing some part of life, but in respect to your addiction, you're noticing you're starting to get scared. You're noticing a progressive loss of control. And you can't answer the question, and you're still thinking you're pulling it off. Does anyone relate to that? And so now we're asking why. So that's what we got to get to, the insanity of the first drink. Because we talk about this as a choice. No, it's not. I've lost the power of choice. They're going to talk to that. A choice would be, I can take this one, or I can take that one, or I can take neither one. Right? But if I don't do something radically different with my addiction, it's taken me to the grave. That's not a choice, right? Right? So to choose before that goes off is just silly because I'm insane, right? Go up to the top of the building, jump off. Halfway down, say, I choose to hit the ground. See, it's not going to change the outcome, but at least you're aligned with your will. Makes you feel better. Cunning, baffling, powerful. Am I making sense? I'm not trying to just be comical. I'm trying to make sense of how crazy we are. Because we're crazy people who don't think ourselves crazy. Okay? All right. So, I'm going to jump over from there to the next page. It says, these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. So what's the terrible cycle? Spree and remorse. Right? Okay, therefore the main problem, not the only problem, but the main problem of the alcoholic centered in his mind rather than his body. So the allergy really isn't a problem if I don't set the terrible cycle in motion. So the main problem is an obsession rather than an allergy. Does that make sense? But if I only treat the allergy, then at some point in the future, I'm liable to fall victim to the allergy again when I use alcohol in another form. Where's my people who knew it wasn't safe to drink, got injured, took a few pain pills, pretty soon found out you could hide that better until you needed 16 doctors and had to steal the script pads. And then the economics got bad and heroin was $50 a gram, and so simple economics. Okay. So there are a few of us here. Okay. So it says if you ask him why he started on that last bender, chances are he'll offer you any one of 100 alibis. Any of you have some alibis? Why you? Well, she left me. They fired me. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility. Right? Relative passes away. Right? Something. But none of them really make sense in the light of havoc an alcoholic drinking bout creates. So for me to justify the wreckage that me taking a drink is going to create, it's silly. There's no human event that's going to be worth me making it worse that way, yes? But that doesn't seem that way in the moment, yeah? So they sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so he can't feel the ache. I love that we got that reaction. The rest of you are going, what's he talking about? Hit himself on the head with a hammer. So what they tell us about that is if you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he'll laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Be honest with yourself. What's your reaction to that? Doesn't apply to me. Or, how funny. Once in a while, he may tell the truth. How many of you didn't tell the truth until you were forced? How many of you really knew the truth and you just gave them an answer because they wouldn't leave you alone? Yeah. Once in a while, he may tell the truth, and the truth, strange to say, is usually he has no more idea why he took the first drink than you have. Why'd you do that? You knew this was going to wreck everything. I don't know. Yes, you do. Okay, well, they were mean to me at work. So I drank, and now I don't have work. None of you ever? Some drinkers have excuses with which they are satisfied part of the time. How many of you had some fallbacks? But in their hearts, they really do not know why they do it. They're talking about us as we're coming out of our lethargy. We're trapped in addiction. We don't want to believe we're trapped in addiction. So my mind's telling me I can get out, and my heart's telling me there's no way you're getting out of this. This is it. If you don't try again, you can't fail again. Stay down. Any of you recall that? Because it'll happen eventually, and only, whoa, what do you got going on? Okay, that's really loud, man. Once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. So they're talking about usually there's a period of time where we're confusing everyone, including ourselves, yes? It says there's an obsession that somehow, someday they'll beat the game, but they often suspect they're down for the count. Do you remember that argument with yourself? Okay? So it says how true this is, few realize. In a vague way, their families and friends sense that these drinkers are abnormal. Did any of your family and friends think you were abnormal?
Only my ex-wife.
How many of you pretty much just got rid of people that knew you very well and just started because it was just easier than explaining yourself over and over, right? I'm just a new guy every day. I'll just go somewhere else. Right? Okay. So Everybody hopefully awaits the day when the sufferer will rouse himself from his lethargy and assert his power of will. The tragic truth is that if a man be a real alcoholic, so now they're talking to me about the real alcoholic, not the hard drinker, not the moderate drinker, the real guy, seldom mildly intoxicated, always more or less insanely drunk, real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That's why I had to diagnose myself to here, because now they're going to start talking about me if this is me, and it doesn't apply to you if it isn't. Does that make sense? Okay. So the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. How many of you have lost something? Did you get it back? No, because you fucking lost it. They didn't say misplaced it. If you drop your watch in the ocean, you have lost your watch. You may get another watch, but you will not, in all likelihood, reclaim that watch. Right? Okay. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it's suspected. How many of you can go back in your history, early in your addiction, maybe midway through your addiction, and remember those times when you desperately wanted to stop, could manifest no outwardly action to show it? You know what I'm talking about? I remember praying desperately, just deliver me from this. I went to church to meet my parents. I had been drinking all night. I've been doing opiates. I'd been doing everything to get there. I walked into my parents' church. They're like 4 rows from the front. I got to walk through the whole crowd. I can feel the judgment of everyone in that church on me. It was heavy. And I smelled bad, and I'm sure I had vomit on my clothes. And I walked in, and I took my seat next to my parents, and I cried, and I pleaded with God, whoever God was, please don't make me go on like this. And I knew I was going back out to my car when this is over, and I'm going to get that bottle out from under the seat, and I'm going to finish it. Anyone relate to me? That you're feeling right now, that's powerless and unmanageability. And I shared it with you so you know I know you. And you know me. Right? Okay. All right. So it goes on to say that the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. I may not have lost the power of choice in many other matters, but in matters of drink, I no longer have that power. Does it make sense? It's starting to make sense why I'm going to need a power greater than me, because there's already a power greater than me operating my life. Because that's why I had to come to believe it in an illness. Alcohol is a power greater than me. Methamphetamine is a power greater than me. Cocaine is a power greater than me. Fentanyl's a power greater than me. Heroin's a power greater than me. I'm going to have to access another one. Greater. Yes? Okay. So it says our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We're unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We're without defense against the first drink. Notice how they separated the idea of memory from consciousness. You think they did that by accident? No, because there's a difference between memory and consciousness, right? Consciousness is I'm aware that I'm aware. And memory is reformed in light of my current circumstance. How many of you had a really shitty experience and then got a little distance and you remember some little part of it that wasn't too bad and you went back for one more because your memory... So you might be this guy because... And when I first came into fellowships a long time ago, Paul and I were comparing notes. They used to say things to you like, you get ready to have a drink, you think it through. You play the tapes. That probably works for a certain type of hard drinker. But for an alcoholic, I cannot bring to consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering and humiliation. And I will create a lie around that experience because my current situation dictates that I get a spiritual release. Yes? Okay. So, I'm going to go from there to top of page 25, and it says, there is a solution. There might be, they didn't say that, did they? Some of us have found, very declarative, there is a solution. And then they're going to talk to us. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. Some people have falsely believed and then told others that our solution is our program. No, it's not. There is no power in the steps. The power is in you. But the step process will reveal that fact to you, through you. So you're not going to like the process, because almost none of us like the process, but you will really like the solution in you. Does that make sense? Okay. That's why we want to do the steps, not because we like the process, but because I love the love that comes through me when I become aware of who I am and whose I am because of the process. Yes? Okay. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us to do but pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. So that's what we do here tonight. We're going to lay the simple kit of spiritual tools at your feet for your inspection. And I suggest to you, I'm trying to lay out the very best case by the author's demonstration. See, Bill Wilson was a stock analyst and a writer, and he sold his services to companies so that people could make informed decisions about buying stock and things like that. He was very talented. He was very good at making a case, even though he wasn't a lawyer. And he had some lawyers that sort of contributed to the authorship of this book. But Bill Wilson, we don't worship Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson's just another drunk. But he laid out a case masterfully for why it's more logical to believe than not to believe based on our collective experience. So if we alter it in any way, we've missed the point of the argument. Because half of us are atheists or agnostics, the other half are religious people dying in addiction. We all need to see a logical case, because you cannot grow in consciousness without examining the evidence with your conscious mind. Right? I cannot recover until I can own what I am recovering from. Yes? And then my inability to recover on my own. Yes? Okay. So then they're going to talk about, we have found much of heaven, and we've been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. So, where's my meth addicts? Y'all like being rocketed, right? That's why they do a third step decision. They say, next we launched. The third step decision, next week we're going to look at 2. We're going to encounter power. We're going to ask that power to go into us and affect a decision. And then next we launched out on a course of vigorous action. I'm going to learn the facts about me, and I'm going to tell you all about him as you notice how changed I am. Does it make sense? Okay. All right, so they're going to go on to what this is we're after. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we've had deep and effective spiritual experiences. So that's what the whole book is about, that they had deep and effective spiritual experiences. They didn't remain abstinent because abstinence was their fucking problem. I'm restless, irritable, and discontented when I'm abstinent. How many of you can remember those first day or days in addiction, and you're out, and you're, oh, I don't think so. Right? This isn't going to go well. Right? The spiritual experience is the swap. I have to have a spiritual liberation. I have to find ease and comfort, and I can't go out in the world to get it because the world's a lie. So I have to find my ease and comfort within me and then take it wherever I go. That's the only place it'll be there when I get there. Handy little trick for an addict to know that in the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found, right? We're going to talk about that next week. Okay, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. How many of you need a revolution? How many of you have had some time in sobriety and periodically needed a revolution? All of us, right? I needed one 3 times today. Yes? So, the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator, capital C, has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. So how many of you could get a job but couldn't keep a job? Could get a relationship, couldn't keep a relationship? Could get happiness in a situation but couldn't keep happiness in a situation? Okay? So it says, if you're seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. So what would be a middle-of-the-road solution? Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Call your sponsor. Don't drink between the meetings. All good suggestions. I'm not panning the suggestions. But if I'm as seriously alcoholic as I've found myself to be, none of that shit's going to get me to 90 days. Any of you shoot for the 90-day plan and you're like, sure would like to get that 30-day, but fuck it, we'll get her next month. So if you're seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible. Any of you find yourself there? So this is where, if we're still relating with them now, we absolutely need to read some more in the book, yes? If we had passed into the region for which there is no return through human aid, we had but 2 alternatives. So now you got to get this. They've told me I lost the power of choice, but now they've told me I have 2 alternatives. So I want to help you understand in the English language, an alternative is not a choice. Because I just explained to you choice. I can take this one, or I can take this one, or I can opt out of both. That's choice. Alternative is, if I don't take this one, I'm going that way. And there ain't no third option. There's no curtain number 3. Right? Okay. So we had but 2 alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other to accept spiritual help. Do you notice how they didn't say we had to do anything except accept the help that's already there? Isn't that interesting? They're witnessing to that. They didn't give you any bravado. They said you can either just keep blocking consciousness of how miserable you are the best you can, or you can accept spiritual help. So what I'm here to tell you is there's a lot of people that are trying to find a way, make a way, and I'm telling you the way's been made. The way has been made for your redemption for a long time, waiting for you to just accept it. Does it make sense? All right? And then it tells us what the requirement for that is. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. The only requirement to grow spiritually is to honestly want to and be willing to make the effort. And it's not an effort to be good. It's an effort to learn the facts about myself and give the credit to the Creator. And I'll be made good as a result of offering myself to another. In fact, I'll become a much better guy than I ever wanted to be. I have, and I continue to, and I'm a very flawed man, but I'm a whole lot better than I ever wanted to be years ago. Does it make sense? Okay, so I'm going to jump from there quickly to one more thing, because we're going to run out of time. I want to look at chapter 3 more about alcoholism. And I'm going to look at the middle of that page. And it says in the middle of the page, page 30, we learned, who's we? The first 100 learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. The only way I'm going to know that, because I only have one symptom in common with alcoholics, is do I have the abnormal reaction? Then I'm going to look at all the other things, because they may not be exactly in common. But if I have the abnormal reaction, and I have a personality change, and I have this inability to leave it alone, and And then I had to learn that I had to fully concede to my innermost self, and I can't do that based on a lie. Can't lie to your innermost self. Does that make sense? And then they say this is the first step in recovery. So I have to admit to myself that I need a redemption in order to receive the redemption that's already there for me. Does it make sense? Okay. And then it goes on to say the delusion that we're like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. See, what happens when I'm redeemed is I don't recover control. I live by a substance called faith, which requires no control. Anyone know what I'm talking about? And I also live in a state of spiritual inebriation, which solves the abstinence dilemma. Does that make sense? So it says, all of us felt at times we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, was inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. So they go on to tell us, and I'm going to go through it quick and then sum up. They tell us the idea that he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. So I submit to you, if you're a real addict, I can control or I can enjoy, but they're mutually exclusive. Yes? I can't control very often because I eventually lost that, but I never enjoyed it when I did. And if I'm enjoying it, all idea of control is gone. Anyone relate? So that roughly got us to who we might be. And any of you that think you might have been found in these pages, next week we're going to go in and meet the Creator. Yeah? All right, thank you.